Grandmaster Yoda is one of the most well-known Jedi in the Order, second only to Obi-Wan Kenobi. Both in-universe and among fans, Yoda is known for his wisdom. At the same time, however, he also had the dubious distinction of leading the Jedi Order to its grave, presiding over the Jedi while the Sith grew in power and enacted a plan for revenge. With that in mind, it's worth reconsidering whether Yoda really earned his reputation as wise, which is exactly what we'll be doing in this video.
Attention, Sergeant on deck!
Yoda had a deep understanding of the Force, the universe, and many things besides. That much is inarguable. He had plenty of sage advice to give his students, of which he had many. But Yoda's judgment as the Grand Master of the Jedi Order was a bit more suspect. Yoda led the Order for centuries, guiding the Jedi through the latter half of the Golden Age of the Republic. In Yoda's time, the Republic reached its zenith, and so too did the Jedi Order. Over the course of Yoda's career as Grand Master, however, he and the rest of the Council sensed a change in the Force, a growing shadow that could only mean the resurgence of the dark side. The Council was divided on what this meant. Some believed it heralded the return of the Sith, or another dark side threat, while Yoda believed it meant that the Chosen One from the prophecy was coming, and that the growing murkiness heralded the balance this Chosen One would bring. As you know, all of them were right. A century and a half later, the Jedi learned that the Sith had indeed returned, so the Jedi reluctantly began to train Anakin Skywalker, who the likes of Master Windu believed was the Chosen One. From there, things rapidly went downhill. Yoda and the other Masters found their vision of the future clouded by the dark side. The galaxy slid into war, and finally, the Dark Lord of the Sith revealed himself and wiped out the Jedi Order, corrupting Anakin Skywalker and turning him into his apprentice. Under Yoda, the Jedi Order went from its apex to total ruin. From the moment the darkness in the Force first became apparent to the end of the Clone Wars, Yoda kept the Jedi Order on a steady course, driving it right into the abyss. At crucial points, his decisions as Grand Master were to adopt a wait-and-see approach to new threats. Time and time again, he urged his fellow Jedi to move cautiously, to wait until the nature of the Sith threat was known before acting. He didn't urge action until the Clone Wars began, and after that, he once again told the Jedi to stay the course, to ride out the war until the Sith's game was revealed. By the time the Jedi learnt the nature of the Sith threat, it was too late, and nearly all of them died. For all his wisdom, Yoda didn't see that coming. The Jedi Council gets criticized a lot for this short sight, and will be the first to argue that most of this criticism is unwarranted. The Sith concealed their plots well, and none of the supposed obvious hints toward the nature of the Sith Grand Plan that are often brought up were obvious to anyone in the universe. We're not going to blame Yoda for not realizing that Palpatine was Sidious, nor that the Clone Wars were a trap, but what we are going to blame him for is that he pretty much did nothing proactive. All he planned to do was wait for the Sith to reveal themselves and go from there. How the hell did he think that was a good idea? The answer is rather simple. He was a product of his time. Yoda joined the Jedi Order less than 2 centuries after the 7th Battle of Ruusan, when some Jedi still remembered the wars with the Sith. The Jedi of his day were extremely wary of a potential Sith resurgence and taught their students to be vigilant. They taught the next generation of Jedi about the new Sith wars extensively, drilling into their heads how the new Sith operated, how Sith factions emerged and changed over the centuries, and how the Jedi had defeated them. They figured that this was key to preventing the return of the Sith. With a few exceptions, the Sith had always been a little predictable. From the Great Hyperspace War of 5000 BBY to the 7th Battle of Ruusan 1,000 years later, they had always operated in the same way. They tried to build empires with which to wage war against the Jedi and the Republic, luring millions into remote regions to follow them with false promises of power. The Jedi of Yoda's day knew that the Sith hadn't all been wiped out at Ruusan. They were aware of Darth Bane and his rule of 2, but they were under the false impression that they had killed Bane and that the Sith had died with him. Nonetheless, they correctly deduced that if the Sith ever did return, they would return under the rule of 2. But that wasn't really a break in the pattern of Sith history. Most Sith factions were ruled by a Dark Lord and their apprentice, after all. The Jedi assumed that these new Sith would still build empires and try to conquer the galaxy just as their predecessors had. Yoda stuck with these assumptions until the end of the Clone Wars. There's a reason why the one time Yoda urged action was at the start of the Clone Wars. Learning that Dooku was a Sith Lord, he assumed the Confederacy of Independent Systems was a new Sith Empire. At the start of the Clone Wars, Yoda believed the Sith threat had revealed itself, which is why he said that the Shroud of the Dark Side had fallen after the Battle of Geonosis, even though the future was still clouded. It was only after the war had been raging for some time that Yoda considered things might be more complicated, and by then, it was too late. Yoda blamed himself for the Jedi Order's demise. To quote the Revenge of the Sith novelization, "My failure, this was. Failed the Jedi, I did." He spoke to the Force, and the Force entered him. Do not blame yourself, my old friend. As it sometimes had these past 13 years, when the Force spoke to him, it spoke in the voice of Qui-Gon Jinn. "Too old I was," Yoda said. "Too rigid, too arrogant to see the old way is not the only way. These Jedi are trained to become the Jedi who had trained me long centuries ago, but those ancient Jedi of a different time, they were. Changed has the galaxy. Changed, the Order did not, because let it change, I did not." More easily said than done, my friend. The curious thing about this passage, however, is how Qui-Gon, and by extension the Force itself, responded to Yoda's admission of failure. Yoda was right about what he did wrong, but the fall of the Jedi still wasn't his fault. As for why, the answer lies in an earlier passage when Yoda realized he couldn't defeat Darth Sidious. Finally, he saw the truth that he, the Avatar of Light, Supreme Master of the Jedi Order, the fiercest, most implacable, most devastatingly powerful foe the darkness had ever known, just didn't have it. He'd never had it. He had lost before he started. He had lost before he was born. The Sith had changed. The Sith had grown, had adapted, had invested 1,000 years intensive study into every aspect of not only the Force, but Jedi lore itself, in preparation for exactly this day. The Sith had remade themselves. They had become new, while the Jedi had spent that same millennium training to refight the last war. The new Sith could not be destroyed with a lightsaber, they could not be burned away by any touch of the Force. The brighter his light, the darker their shadow. How could one win a war against the dark when war itself had become the dark's own weapon? It would be wrong to blame Yoda for the fall of the Jedi Order because, even though he had made some bad calls, any choice he made would have had the same result. The Sith weren't playing by the Jedi's rules. They didn't leave the Jedi an opening, a way for them to thwart the Sith grand plan. By the time the Jedi Council sensed that the vibes of the Force were off, the Sith were already on the verge of victory. The Jedi Order lost the moment that Palpatine was elected Supreme Chancellor, which was, at the time, when they had no reason to suspect the Sith had infiltrated the Senate. Darth Sidious carefully crafted a scenario in which the Jedi would lose no matter what, and it was already in place before the Jedi even knew for certain that the Sith still existed. At the same time, we can't fully exonerate Yoda. Just because there was no better choice for him to make doesn't excuse his inaction, his inability to see the Sith threat for what it was. Yoda absolutely failed, repeatedly and catastrophically. But here's the thing, that doesn't mean Yoda wasn't a wise Jedi. In our opinion, Yoda really was one of the wisest Jedi Masters in the Order's history. Not because he never got things wrong, but because he did. Wisdom isn't always about being right, but rather learning from one's mistakes, and it was Yoda's capacity to do so that made him such a great Jedi Master. To put it another way, the greatest teacher failure is. But that's just our take. What do you think? Do you think Yoda is overrated? Let us know your thoughts in the comments section below. As always guys, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.